A room full of smiling faces erupted in laughter the moment the woman stepped through the restaurant doors. Some people covered their mouths. Others openly pointed. My ex-wife stood at the center of it all with a satisfied smile, convinced she had orchestrated the perfect public humiliation. She had invited everyone we had ever known to watch me fail one last time. The woman beside me couldn't hear their laughter, but she noticed every pair of eyes staring at her. She gently reached for my arm, searching my face for reassurance instead of asking questions she couldn't hear the answers to. In that single moment, I realized that the cruelest person in the room wasn't the one people were mocking. It was the one who had arranged the entire spectacle. What happened over the next few hours would leave every person in that room crying, including the woman who thought she had already won. If you believe kindness is stronger than cruelty, forgiveness is more powerful than revenge, and everyone deserves a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share this story with someone who believes in hope, and subscribe to our channel for more emotional journeys that remind us what truly matters. For nearly 12 years, Everett Nolan had built his life around one promise. He believed that if he loved deeply enough, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough, his marriage would survive anything. Friends admired him because he never complained, even when he worked long weekends to keep the mortgage paid. Neighbors often saw him repairing fences, helping elderly families carry groceries, or coaching neighborhood children during community baseball events. He wasn't perfect, but he believed kindness always came back in unexpected ways. That belief slowly disappeared during the final years of his marriage. His ex-wife, Vanessa, had once been warm and adventurous. Somewhere between promotions, expensive social circles, and an obsession with appearances, she became someone who valued admiration more than honesty. She cared deeply about how people viewed her and quietly measured every relationship according to status. Everett ignored the warning signs for years because he believed difficult seasons eventually passed. Instead, every passing month widened the distance between them until the marriage finally collapsed beneath years of resentment and silent disappointments. The divorce wasn't explosive. It was strangely calm, almost rehearsed. Vanessa walked away with confidence while Everett walked away carrying boxes of memories and questions he couldn't answer. Their friends naturally divided into two groups. Most followed Vanessa because she controlled the narrative before Everett had even packed his belongings. She described him as emotionally distant, socially awkward, and incapable of making her happy. Everett refused to defend himself. He believed arguing over the past would only create more bitterness. Life after divorce felt painfully quiet. Everett moved into a modest apartment filled with second-hand furniture and unfinished walls. Every morning he drove to his architectural design office, completed his projects, and returned home to evenings that echoed with silence. The loneliness didn't frighten him as much as the realization that he had forgotten who he was without someone else's expectations shaping every decision. Months passed before his older sister convinced him to volunteer at a community center that offered support programs for adults with disabilities. Everett resisted at first because he believed he had nothing left to give anyone. Eventually he agreed, hoping the volunteer work would distract him from his own heartbreak. That decision quietly changed everything. Among the volunteers was a woman named Clara Winslow. She was 36 years old, worked as an art instructor for children with hearing impairments, and had been deaf since early childhood after surviving a severe illness. She communicated primarily through American Sign Language but also read lips remarkably well. Clara possessed a calm confidence that made everyone around her feel understood, even without spoken words. Her smile carried a warmth that seemed untouched by bitterness despite the countless challenges she had faced. Everett knew only a few basic signs during his first volunteer session. Embarrassed by his lack of knowledge, he spent evenings watching educational videos and practicing the alphabet until his hands ached. Week after week he learned new signs, not because anyone expected him to, but because he wanted every person he met at the center to feel included. Clara noticed his effort long before she acknowledged it. Their friendship developed slowly during bright afternoons filled with painting classes, fundraising events, and outdoor family festivals. Instead of talking endlessly about themselves, they communicated through shared moments. Clara often laughed with her entire face, her eyes sparkling with genuine amusement whenever Everett accidentally mixed up similar signs. Rather than correcting him impatiently, she celebrated every improvement as though it were a major victory. For the first time in years, Everett experienced a relationship free from judgment. Clara never cared about his salary, his appearance, or the painful rumors surrounding his divorce. She paid attention to the quiet things that most people overlooked. She noticed how he always made sure everyone received lunch before serving himself. She noticed how carefully he listened whenever someone shared a difficult memory. She noticed his habit of fixing broken chairs without telling anyone afterward. Everett gradually realized he smiled more often than he had during the final years of his marriage. Outside the community center, Vanessa's life appeared glamorous. Social media displayed luxury vacations, elegant brunches, designer clothing, and endless celebrations with influential friends. Every photograph seemed carefully designed to convince the world she had never been happier. Yet behind those polished images lived constant competition. Every event became another opportunity to prove she had chosen the better life. One afternoon Vanessa learned through a mutual acquaintance that Everett had been spending time with a deaf woman. Instead of feeling relief that he had finally found companionship, she interpreted it as an opportunity. Her closest friends mocked the idea, reducing Clara to cruel stereotypes and insensitive jokes. Vanessa laughed along, convincing herself that Everett deserved another reminder of how far beneath her standards he had always been. She began planning what she privately called the perfect farewell performance. Under the excuse of celebrating the successful sale of their former family home, Vanessa organized an elaborate daytime luncheon at one of the city's most elegant restaurants. She invited old neighbors, former co-workers, distant relatives, and mutual friends. She even reached out to Everett, insisting the event would provide healthy closure and allow everyone to move forward peacefully. Against his better judgment, Everett accepted after Clara encouraged him not to let fear control his future. Clara agreed to accompany him, believing kindness often disarmed hostility better than avoidance. On the morning of the luncheon, sunlight poured across the city through clear blue skies. Downtown parks overflowed with families enjoying the pleasant weather. Street musicians filled sidewalks with cheerful melodies that Clara could not hear but happily felt through subtle vibrations beneath her feet whenever they paused near public squares. Everett noticed her smiling toward children dancing beside a fountain, and for a brief moment he forgot the anxiety waiting ahead. As they approached the restaurant entrance, Everett felt his heartbeat quicken. Something about the invitations, the unusually large guest list, and Vanessa's sudden friendliness felt unnatural. Clara gently squeezed his hand after noticing the tension in his shoulders. She signed a simple reminder that courage was not the absence of fear but the decision to keep walking despite it. Those words stayed with him as they entered together. Conversation inside the restaurant stopped almost instantly. Dozens of faces turned toward them. Some guests whispered before pretending not to stare. Others exchanged amused glances. A few people smiled politely, but many looked toward Vanessa, waiting for her reaction as though they had rehearsed this moment together. Vanessa rose slowly from her chair wearing an elegant cream-colored dress and a smile that barely concealed her satisfaction. She welcomed Everett with exaggerated politeness before turning her attention toward Clara. Her expression carried the unmistakable confidence of someone convinced she controlled every second that would follow. Everett suddenly noticed several smartphones already pointed in their direction. His stomach tightened. This had never been a celebration. It had been carefully designed as a public performance, and he and Clara had unknowingly become the main attraction. Everett had walked into difficult rooms before. He had faced judges during his divorce proceedings, survived painful meetings with financial advisors after dividing everything he had worked years to build, and endured lonely holidays that reminded him how quickly life could change. Yet nothing compared to the feeling of standing in that elegant dining room while dozens of familiar faces silently waited for his humiliation to begin. Clara sensed the sudden shift immediately. She could not hear the whispers surrounding them, but she had spent her entire life reading expressions, body language, and the invisible tension people carried. Her smile faded slightly as she noticed phones being lifted, amused smirk spreading from table to table, and Vanessa's theatrical confidence. Instead of stepping backward, Clara gently straightened her shoulders and stood beside Everett with quiet dignity. She had learned years ago that confidence was sometimes the only shield against people determined to make someone feel small. Vanessa welcomed them with exaggerated enthusiasm, guiding everyone's attention toward the couple as though introducing the entertainment for the afternoon. Her words were carefully chosen to sound friendly while hiding sharp insults beneath every sentence. She described Clara as Everett's surprising new companion, and joked that Everett had finally found someone who would never have to listen to him complain. The room erupted with laughter. Some people laughed because they genuinely found it amusing. Others laughed because they were afraid of standing against the loudest voice in the room. A few lowered their eyes, already realizing the event had crossed a line they hadn't expected. Clara looked around slowly, noticing mouths opening in laughter without understanding the sound itself. She turned toward Everett, searching his face instead of everyone else's. She didn't need to hear the joke to recognize that it had been cruel. Everett forced a reassuring smile even though his heart felt as though it had been wrapped in barbed wire. He signed only 3 simple words he knew she would understand immediately. "You're not alone." Those words changed something inside Clara. Instead of shrinking beneath the weight of strangers' judgment, she smiled gently and rested her hand on Everett's arm. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. It wasn't meant to challenge anyone. It was simply the quiet reassurance of someone choosing compassion over embarrassment. Ironically, that simple act unsettled Vanessa more than any angry confrontation could have. The luncheon continued with forced conversations, expensive meals, and carefully disguised gossip. Vanessa floated from table to table making sure everyone noticed Everett and Clara. She repeated little stories from the past, twisting memories into jokes that painted Everett as awkward, unsuccessful, and incapable of moving on. Each story drew another wave of laughter from those eager to remain inside Vanessa's circle of approval. Across the room sat an elderly couple named Gerald and Miriam Foster. They had known Everett since he was a teenager. Unlike many guests, they remembered the countless weekends Everett had spent repairing their porch after Gerald's arthritis made it impossible for him to work. They remembered him mowing their lawn without accepting payment after Miriam underwent chemotherapy. Listening to Vanessa's version of Everett's character felt strangely disconnected from the man they had known for decades. Miriam quietly reached across the table and squeezed her husband's hand, whispering that something about the afternoon felt deeply wrong. Meanwhile, Clara noticed one young waitress watching everything with visible discomfort. During a quiet moment between courses, the waitress approached their table with fresh water. Instead of rushing away, she smiled warmly at Clara before carefully signing the words, "Welcome. I'm glad you're here." The signs were imperfect, but the kindness behind them was unmistakable. Clara's face brightened instantly. Everett thanked the waitress, who admitted she had been learning American Sign Language because her younger brother had recently lost much of his hearing after an accident. She explained that she practiced every chance she could because she wanted him to feel included instead of isolated. Clara responded with patient encouragement, showing her a few corrected signs while smiling with genuine appreciation. Several nearby guests watched the exchange. For the first time that afternoon, the attention surrounding Clara had nothing to do with pity or mockery. People saw an intelligent, compassionate woman encouraging someone who simply wanted to communicate better. The warmth of that interaction quietly interrupted the atmosphere Vanessa had worked so hard to create. Feeling control beginning to slip away, Vanessa announced a surprise presentation she claimed would celebrate new beginnings. A large screen descended from the ceiling while one of her friends connected a laptop to the projector. Everett immediately recognized old family photographs appearing across the screen. Vacation pictures. Birthday celebrations. Wedding memories. Images from a life he had spent years trying to heal from. At first the slideshow seemed sentimental. Then the captions appeared. Every photograph included sarcastic comments designed to embarrass Everett. His expressions were mocked. His clothing choices became jokes. Even moments when he had been comforting grieving relatives were reframed as examples of his supposedly boring personality. The room laughed again, although this time noticeably fewer people joined in. Then came the final slide. A recent photograph of Everett volunteering at the community center appeared beside a secretly taken picture of Clara. Beneath them, enormous letters read, "When no one else will listen." Silence replaced laughter. Even people who had laughed earlier stared at the screen in disbelief. The cruelty no longer felt clever. It felt ugly. Everett's face turned pale. He looked toward Clara, terrified she would finally see the caption everyone else had just read. Although she couldn't hear the laughter or read every word from that distance, she understood enough by everyone's reactions. Her eyes remained fixed on Everett, not on the screen. Then she did something no one expected. She calmly walked toward the projector, politely asking one of the staff members for a marker and a notepad. Curious whispers spread through the room as she wrote carefully across several pages before holding them up one after another for everyone to read. The first page simply said, "I was born hearing." The room became completely still. The second page read, "I lost my hearing when I was 6 years old." People stopped looking at Vanessa. They looked only at Clara. The third page appeared. "I spent years believing I was broken because strangers laughed before they knew me." Someone quietly lowered their phone. Another guest wiped away tears before anyone noticed. Clara continued. "I learned that people who mock disabilities reveal far more about themselves than about those they insult." No one laughed. Not a single person. Finally she held up one last page while looking directly at Vanessa. "The kindest man I've ever met is standing beside me. He learned my language because he believed I deserved to be understood. That is something no joke can ever erase." Everett felt tears filling his eyes. Around the restaurant, expressions of amusement dissolved into shame. Guests who had arrived expecting light-hearted entertainment suddenly realized they had become an audience to public cruelty. Several quietly placed their phones face down on the tables. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Gerald Foster slowly stood from his chair. Without saying a word at first, he walked across the dining room until he reached Everett. Then, in full view of every guest, the elderly man embraced him tightly. The gesture broke something inside the room. One by one, people began remembering their own experiences with Everett. A former co-worker admitted Everett had anonymously donated money when her husband lost his job. Another guest recalled Everett spending every Saturday coaching children whose parents couldn't afford private sports programs. Someone else remembered Everett paying for an elderly stranger's groceries without expecting thanks. Story after story surfaced. Each memory dismantled the false image Vanessa had spent years creating. She tried interrupting several times, insisting everyone was overreacting, but nobody seemed interested in listening anymore. The attention she had carefully orchestrated was no longer focused on humiliating Everett. It had turned into something she had never anticipated. People were beginning to see who she had become. Vanessa remained standing beside the projector, but the confidence that had filled her face only minutes earlier was gone. She looked around the restaurant searching for the approving smiles she had counted on all afternoon, yet every familiar face seemed different now. Some people stared at the table in front of them, ashamed they had laughed. Others looked directly at Clara with quiet admiration. The room had become painfully silent, not because people had nothing to say, but because they were finally thinking about the weight of their own choices. Everett had never wanted revenge. Even now, with the truth unfolding in front of everyone, he felt no satisfaction in seeing Vanessa cornered by the consequences of her own actions. He simply wanted the afternoon to end. Years of carrying anger had taught him that humiliation never healed humiliation. He gently took Clara's hand, intending to leave before the situation became even more painful for everyone involved. Before they reached the restaurant entrance, something unexpected happened. The young waitress hurried toward the restaurant manager and quietly explained everything she had witnessed from the beginning of the luncheon. The manager, a dignified man named Russell, had spent nearly 30 years serving families in the community. His younger sister had also been deaf, and he understood better than most how deeply public ridicule could wound someone. After hearing what had taken place, he walked calmly to the center of the room and politely asked for everyone's attention. Russell apologized publicly to Clara and Everett for allowing the luncheon to continue after realizing its true purpose. He explained that his restaurant had always welcomed families from every background and ability, and that no guest should ever feel like an object of entertainment. As a gesture of respect, he announced that neither Everett nor Clara would be charged for their meals. More importantly, he informed Vanessa that future private events would no longer be accepted if they promoted harassment or discrimination. A wave of quiet applause spread through the dining room. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was heartfelt. Clara smiled softly, touched less by the free meal than by the courage it took for someone to stand publicly for what was right. As Everett and Clara prepared to leave once again, an elderly woman slowly approached them using a walking cane. Her name was Eleanor Brooks, a retired elementary school teacher whom Everett barely remembered from years earlier. Tears streamed gently down her cheeks as she looked at Clara with deep affection before turning to Everett. She explained that decades ago one of her students had been deaf. At the time, very few schools offered proper support, and the little girl spent years feeling invisible. Eleanor had always regretted not learning sign language herself. Watching Everett dedicate himself to learning an entirely new language simply so another human being would never feel isolated had reminded her of the teacher she had always wanted to become. Without embarrassment, the 80-year-old woman apologized, not because she had mocked Clara, but because she had remained silent while others did. Her apology inspired something remarkable. Another guest stood. Then another. Then another. Across the restaurant, people who had laughed, stayed quiet, or simply watched without speaking began offering sincere apologies. Some admitted they had followed Vanessa's lead because they wanted to fit in. Others confessed they had never realized how easily ordinary people could become part of someone else's cruelty simply by refusing to object. The atmosphere that had begun with ridicule slowly transformed into one of honest reflection. One middle-aged father quietly admitted that his own teenage son had recently begun losing his hearing due to a genetic condition. He confessed that watching Clara's dignity had terrified him because he suddenly imagined strangers laughing at his own child one day. Through tears, he promised he would spend that very weekend learning basic American Sign Language alongside his son instead of expecting the boy to carry the burden alone. Clara's eyes filled with emotion. She gently embraced the man. She had entered the restaurant expecting rejection. Instead, she was witnessing hearts changing one by one. Meanwhile, Vanessa remained frozen near the projector. For the first time in many years, no one rushed to comfort her. No one defended her behavior. Even the friends who had helped organize the presentation quietly gathered their belongings and left without saying goodbye. One woman paused briefly beside Vanessa before whispering that she had crossed a line that should never have been crossed. Within minutes, the crowded luncheon that Vanessa had spent weeks organizing began to empty. Not because people wanted to escape embarrassment. Because they wanted distance from the cruelty they had participated in. Everett looked back one final time before stepping outside into the bright afternoon sunlight. Through the restaurant windows, he could see Vanessa sitting alone at the head table. The decorations remained untouched. The expensive flowers still covered every centerpiece. Yet the room that had once echoed with laughter now felt painfully empty. Clara noticed Everett's expression. She gently signed a simple question. "Are you angry?" Everett watched families walking along the sunny sidewalk, children laughing as they chased pigeons across the plaza, elderly couples enjoying coffee beneath colorful umbrellas, and volunteers planting fresh flowers around a nearby fountain. Life continued peacefully outside the walls of the restaurant. After a long moment, he slowly shook his head. He signed back. "I'm tired of anger." Those 4 words carried more freedom than any speech he could have delivered. Instead of dwelling on what had happened, Everett suggested they visit the community center before heading home. It was hosting its annual daytime art exhibition, where children and adults with hearing impairments displayed paintings, sculptures, and handmade crafts. Clara's face immediately brightened. When they arrived, the atmosphere could not have been more different from the restaurant. Bright sunlight poured through large windows. Families admired colorful artwork while children proudly explained their creations through sign language. Volunteers greeted everyone with warm smiles. No one stared. No one judged. Every person belonged. During the exhibition, Clara unveiled a painting she had quietly completed over several months. The canvas showed 2 large oak trees growing from opposite sides of a rocky hillside. Years of storms had bent their trunks in different directions, yet their branches stretched toward each other until they intertwined high above the ground, creating a natural arch filled with sunlight. Beneath the painting, a small handwritten message read, "Kindness is not measured by what we hear. It is measured by what we choose to see in one another." Visitors gathered around the artwork, many wiping away tears after learning its meaning. A representative from a local accessibility foundation happened to attend the exhibition that afternoon. Deeply moved by Clara's work and Everett's volunteer efforts, she invited them to partner with the organization in expanding sign language education throughout schools and community centers across the county. What had begun as one painful afternoon unexpectedly opened the door to helping thousands of families communicate more compassionately. Months passed. The story from the restaurant quietly spread through the community, not as gossip, but as a reminder of how quickly ordinary cruelty could be transformed by extraordinary grace. Schools invited Clara to speak about inclusion. Everett organized free workshops teaching basic American Sign Language to parents, teachers, restaurant employees, and first responders. Every class filled beyond capacity. People didn't remember the joke anymore. They remembered the lesson. Vanessa's life changed as well. The admiration she had spent years chasing disappeared almost overnight. More painful than losing social invitations was the realization that she had become someone she no longer recognized. For months she avoided public gatherings, haunted by the memory of Clara standing silently with those handwritten pages. Nearly a year later, during another bright spring afternoon, Vanessa quietly visited the community center. She wasn't dressed for attention. She wore no designer labels. She carried no audience with her. Only a small envelope. When Everett noticed her waiting outside beneath blooming maple trees, he walked over cautiously. Vanessa's eyes immediately filled with tears. She handed him the envelope without saying much. Inside was a handwritten letter. It contained no excuses. No attempts to justify her actions. Only an honest admission that she had allowed pride, bitterness, and the desperate need for approval to destroy the person she once hoped to become. She thanked Everett for never responding to cruelty with cruelty because, in the end, his compassion had forced her to confront herself more honestly than revenge ever could. Everett folded the letter carefully. He didn't erase the past. He couldn't. But he chose not to carry it any longer. He wished Vanessa peace and sincerely hoped she would become the person she had once dreamed of being. As she quietly walked away beneath the afternoon sun, neither of them looked back. Some endings aren't about getting even. They're about finally being free. Before this story comes to a close, we'd love to hear from you. What touched your heart the most? Was it Clara's quiet courage, Everett's decision to let go of anger, or the moment strangers found the courage to admit they were wrong? Leave a meaningful comment below because your thoughts may encourage someone else who needs hope today. Everett and Clara continued building a life centered on kindness rather than recognition. They discovered that love grows strongest when it is rooted in respect, patience, and understanding instead of pride. The painful afternoon that was meant to destroy them became the very moment that united an entire community around compassion. People who had once remained silent found their voices. Children grew up seeing inclusion instead of prejudice. Families learned a new language, not only with their hands, but with their hearts. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey. Remember, the world is changed not by the loudest people in the room, but by those who quietly choose kindness when cruelty seems easier. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving someone wrong, it is proving that love, dignity, and forgiveness can outshine even the darkest moments. And those are the endings that stay with us forever.